Stories, they cut her out of the will, but the secret inheritance changed everything. And have you ever truly wondered who would stand by your side if every last vestige of your success, your status, your wealth, vanished overnight? Who would remain when there was nothing left to gain? I, Lysander Thorne, a man who once believed he understood the intricacies of loyalty and affection, found myself grappling with this very question, and it was a question that demanded a definitive, undeniable answer. I decided not to wait for fate to reveal it. I chose to unearth the truth myself, in the most profound and humbling way imaginable. I became a beggar to learn the truth, and the truth, when it finally unfurled, was more shocking, more painful, and ultimately, more redemptive than I could have ever conceived. Why would a man with millions, a name synonymous with prestige and philanthropy, choose to abandon it all and pretend to be homeless? The question itself sounds utterly absurd, doesn't it? Yet, for me, Lysander Thorne, founder of the prestigious Thorne Foundation and a man who had dedicated his entire adult life to the noble pursuit of cultural preservation and artistic patronage, it became not just a pressing question, but an urgent, necessary experiment for my very soul. My life, from the outside looking in, appeared an uninterrupted symphony of success. My days were a meticulously choreographed dance of high-level board meetings, exquisite gallery openings, and quiet hours spent poring over ancient manuscripts. My name was whispered in revered tones, synonymous with art, culture, and boundless generosity. I had built an empire, not of commerce, but of legacy, believing that the true measure of a man lay in what he contributed to the enduring beauty of the world. But beneath that gleaming facade, a disquieting truth had begun to fester, an insidious doubt, gnawing relentlessly at my peace of mind. It began subtly, an insidious whisper that was easy to dismiss amidst the clamor of my busy life, but it grew into a deafening roar following a recent, brutal health scare. A severe cardiac event, sudden and utterly brutal in its onset, had left me teetering precariously on the precipice of mortality. One moment, I was vibrant, commanding, dictating terms from my opulent study; the next, I was a frail, gasping shell of a man, gripped by a pain so profound it threatened to extinguish me entirely. It was a stark, unforgiving reminder that even the most carefully constructed empires eventually crumble, and that time, the ultimate, relentless arbiter, waits for no one. As I lay there in that sterile, unforgiving hospital bed, a captive of my own failing body, frail and vulnerable, unable to manage even the simplest of tasks myself, I had nothing left to do but observe. And what I saw, what I heard, profoundly disturbed me. The visits, which in the immediate aftermath of my collapse had been filled with genuine, if fleeting, concern, quickly shifted in tone. The hushed conversations outside my room, just beyond the half-closed door, weren't about my recovery, about the efficacy of the new medication, or the prognosis for my long-term health. Instead, they revolved, with increasing frequency and blatant disregard for my supposed privacy, around the future of the Thorne Foundation, about my extensive and highly valuable art collection, about my numerous properties scattered across continents, and, most tellingly, about my will. The thinly veiled anxieties about my health gave way to barely concealed eagerness about my assets. It was as if my impending demise, rather than being a tragedy, was an inconvenience that simply needed to be managed for maximum personal gain. The vultures, as the saying goes, began to circle, their eyes glinting with a hunger I found utterly repellent. It was not just the distant acquaintances, the business partners I barely knew, or the opportunistic associates I encountered in the cutthroat world of philanthropy, it was my closest remaining family. My grandniece, Serafina Thorne, the elegant and ambitious head of PR for the Thorne Foundation, a position I had personally groomed her for from her early 20s, seemed more concerned with the optics of my illness than my actual well-being. I remember overhearing her on the phone, her voice hushed but distinct, describing my valiant fight to a journalist, while just moments before, she had barely managed a perfunctory nod in my direction. Her fiancé, Barnaby Finch, a junior partner in a venture capital firm, a man whose ambition was as transparent as his designer glasses, made thinly veiled suggestions about restructuring the foundation's assets to maximize efficiency, a euphemism, I knew, for personal gain, for liquidating assets that didn't generate immediate profit, regardless of their cultural significance. Their conversations, always a little too loud, a little too close to my half-open door, painted a vivid, chilling picture of a future where my legacy would be twisted, diluted, and ultimately plundered by those I had trusted to carry it forward. The Thorn Foundation, my life's work, built on a bedrock of integrity and a genuine love for the arts, risked becoming a mere vehicle for social climbing, financial exploitation, and the aggrandizement of names other than my own. The thought sent a cold shiver down my spine. This profound disillusionment, this deep, gnawing disappointment in the very people I had been considering for my vast inheritance, solidified my resolve. I had always believed that true character emerged not in the sunshine of prosperity, but in the crucible of adversity. So, I decided, with a clarity that bordered on obsession, to create my own adversity. I decided to strip myself bare, to shed the opulent trappings of wealth and prestige, and to observe, from the very bottom, who I truly was to these people. My plan was meticulous, almost theatrical in its design, born from months of silent contemplation in that hospital bed. I would feign a complete financial collapse, a personal destitution so profound that it would leave me utterly powerless, utterly dependent, and entirely reliant on the kindness, or cruelty, of others. I would transform myself into a frail, disheveled, and seemingly penniless former academic, a man whose intellectual prowess was still present, perhaps, but whose worldly possessions had vanished like smoke. My trusted lawyer, Mr. Peterson, a man whose loyalty had been forged over 40 years of unwavering service, was the only soul privy to my elaborate charade. His initial reaction was one of stunned disbelief, followed by a quiet, almost paternal concern, but once he understood the depth of my conviction, he became my indispensable accomplice. He helped me set up a labyrinthine network of secret accounts, discreetly managed offshore, ensuring my true wealth remained untouched and untraceable, a secure anchor in the storm I was about to unleash. He secured a small, dilapidated apartment in a forgotten, almost derelict part of the city, a place where the wallpaper peeled in curling strips, where the floorboards groaned underfoot with every step, and where the damp air carried the faint scent of neglect. It was a stark, almost brutal contrast to the opulent penthouse I was accustomed to, a deliberate shock to my system. I began my transformation there, painstakingly learning to dress in threadbare clothes, to walk with a slight, almost imperceptible stoop that hinted at a lifetime of burdens, to cultivate a perpetual air of weary resignation in my eyes. I even allowed my once meticulously coiffed silver hair to grow long and unkempt, my distinguished beard to become sparse and scraggly. I practiced my new persona in front of a cracked mirror, observing how the light caught the hollows beneath my cheekbones, how a new tremor entered my voice when I spoke. The transformation was so complete that even my reflection barely recognized me. The sacrifice was immense, not just of comfort, but of dignity, of identity. I was Lysander Thorn, the man who had shaped the cultural landscape of the city, but to the world, I would become an anonymous, forgotten relic. It was a daunting prospect, filled with fear and uncertainty, but the burning desire to unearth the truth, to protect my legacy from those who would tarnish it, propelled me forward. I wanted to see, with my own eyes, who would extend a hand to a man who had nothing left to offer, and who would turn their back. The stage was set, the curtain drawn. The test had begun. So, how did my greedy family treat the poor old uncle? The answer, though anticipated in the quiet hours of my preparation, still hit me with a chilling clarity that settled deep in my bones, a cold ache that confirmed my darkest suspicions. It was a performance in itself, a grotesque ballet of calculated avoidance and thinly veiled contempt, orchestrated with a precision that almost rivaled my own. From the moment the fabricated news of my ruin began to circulate through the city's elite circles, a carefully leaked series of whispers about disastrous investments, a sudden market crash, and an inexplicable loss of my entire fortune, the transformation in their demeanor was immediate and brutal. I, in my carefully crafted disguise, began to frequent places I knew Serafina and Barnaby would inevitably be, the upscale cafes where they conducted their power lunches, their voices echoing with feigned importance, the exclusive charity galas they felt compelled to attend for networking, rather than genuine philanthropy, even the hallowed halls of the Thorn Foundation itself, where I would occasionally linger, a ghostly echo of my former self, ostensibly seeking old colleagues or assistance. The interactions were painful, each one a fresh cut, yet utterly illuminating. When they first spotted me, a flicker of confusion would cross their faces, a momentary recognition of something familiar in the decrepit figure before them, quickly replaced by a horrified, almost nauseated realization. Serafina, my grandniece, would first feign a look of genuine shock, her hand flying to her mouth, quickly morphing into one of profound embarrassment. "Uncle Lysander," she'd whisper, her voice laced with a mixture of pity and utter revulsion, as if my very presence was a stain on her immaculate designer suit, a blight on her carefully curated reputation. She would then make a hurried, unconvincing excuse about a pressing engagement, a crucial meeting, or a sudden, debilitating headache, before practically fleeing the scene, often dragging a reluctant, yet clearly complicit, Barnaby in her wake. I watched them go, a bitter taste in my mouth, the charade feeling less like an experiment and more like a cruel reality. Barnaby, true to his crass nature, was less subtle, less polished in his disdain. His smirks were barely concealed, his eyes darting around to see if anyone else noticed the disgrace that was I. He would offer a curt nod, a dismissive wave of the hand, never stopping, never engaging. I recall one particularly stinging encounter outside a high-end restaurant. He was with a group of equally affluent associates, laughing loudly. He saw me, hesitated for a fraction of a second, then plastered a thin smile on his face, quickly turning away and resuming his boisterous conversation. I once overheard him, speaking to a junior associate at the foundation, referring to me as "poor old Thorn," followed by a dismissive chuckle and a cold, chilling comment about how one must know when to step aside, especially when the mind begins to wander. It was a subtle poison, seeping into the public perception, justifying their complete abandonment of me, preemptively absolving them of any future guilt. The rumors about my mental decline, subtly but effectively spread by Serafina, were particularly galling, a calculated strike at my very identity. "He's not quite himself, you know," I overheard her tell a prominent socialite at a gallery opening, a place I had once commanded, all that stress, perhaps a touch of senility. Such a shame, after all he built. This narrative, carefully crafted and whispered in influential circles, allowed them to cut all ties without appearing heartless or opportunistic. They were simply protecting themselves and the foundation from an embarrassing, unpredictable relative. They ensured that my supposed fall from grace was not just financial, but intellectual and social, rendering me utterly harmless and easily dismissed. The feeling of being cut out, not just from their lives but from their very consideration, long before any will was ever read, was a stark, painful testament to their true character. They saw me as a liability, a blight on their carefully cultivated image, rather than a human being in need. Every encounter, every averted gaze, every dismissive comment reinforced every suspicion I had harbored, solidifying my resolve to see this experiment through to its bitter, necessary end. I remember one particularly cold evening. I was huddled on a bench in the city park, the wind cutting through my thin coat, trying to read a discarded newspaper by the dim light of a street lamp. Serafina and Barnaby walked past, their laughter echoing through the crisp air, oblivious to my presence, or perhaps, willfully ignorant. They were dressed impeccably, on their way to some glittering event, their faces alight with ambition and self-satisfaction. A profound loneliness settled over me then, a chilling realization of how utterly invisible I had become, not just to them, but to the world that once revered me. I was a ghost in my own city. This deep isolation, this stripping away of every external validation, was perhaps the most difficult part of the experiment. It forced me to confront myself, truly, for the first time in decades. Who was Lysander Thorn without his fortune, without his title, without the adulation of society? The answer, I was beginning to learn, was a man stripped to his core, vulnerable, yet paradoxically, clearer than he had ever been. But then, amidst this calculated cruelty, amidst the chilling emptiness of my grandniece's and her fiancé's abandonment, a different kind of interaction began to unfold, one that would utterly redefine my understanding of human compassion, shattering my cynical expectations. It was with Kalen Vance, a quiet, almost reclusive archivist at the Thorn Foundation. I had known Kalen, of course, in my previous life, a diligent, unassuming young man, often lost amidst dusty tomes and ancient records in the Foundation's vast archives, a mind sharp and precise, but a presence so understated he was often overlooked in the bustling, self-important corridors of the Foundation. He had only met me briefly, usually during my infrequent visits to the archives to inspect a rare manuscript or discuss a new acquisition. Our interactions were always polite nods, respectful deferrals on his part, and a brief, professional query on mine. Now, in my disguise, he wouldn't have recognized me fully. Perhaps a vague sense of familiarity, a flicker of recognition in the eyes that lingered for a moment too long, but nothing more concrete to connect the disheveled pauper to the renowned patron. I was merely another anonymous face in the city's vast, often desperate, landscape. My first encounter with Kalen in my new guise was entirely accidental, or so it seemed at the time. I was sitting on that same parked bench outside a public library, trying to decipher the faded print of a tattered newspaper I'd found, when he walked past. He hesitated, then stopped. He didn't look at me with pity or scorn, but with a simple, unadorned concern. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his voice soft, almost hesitant, as if afraid to intrude. "Are you all right? You look cold." I mumbled something non-committal, a practiced gesture of dismissal, used to being ignored, to being invisible. But Kalen didn't leave. He simply sat down on the far end of the bench, a respectful distance away. He wasn't prying, wasn't judging, wasn't offering advice or condemnation. He just sat, his quiet presence a balm against the chilling indifference of the city. And then, he offered me a sandwich he had in his simple brown paper bag, a meticulously wrapped turkey and cheese. "I packed too much for lunch," he said, his gaze steady and kind. "Please, take it. It would just go to waste." It was a simple gesture, devoid of pity, brimming with genuine, unsolicited concern. I took the sandwich, my hands trembling slightly, the first true warmth I had felt in weeks. This became a pattern, evolving organically, without words or explicit agreement. Kalen never pressed me for details about my past, never asked for my name, never sought to uncover my story. He simply started leaving anonymous care packages at the entrance of my dilapidated apartment building. At first it was just a brown paper bag with a thermos of hot, fragrant soup. I could smell the carrots and herbs, and a crisp, ripe piece of fruit. Then, small, unassuming books began to appear, a classic novel I hadn't read in decades, a collection of poetry from a lesser-known poet, a historical account of a forgotten civilization. He would simply place them there, knock softly, and walk away quickly, almost as if embarrassed by his own kindness, as if he didn't want to be thanked or acknowledged. I would watch him from my grimy window, a lump forming in my throat, a profound sense of gratitude stirring within me. This was not a calculated act of charity, it was spontaneous, pure, born of an innate goodness. Sometimes, he would, accidentally, encounter me in the park where I often sat. He would offer to help me navigate the complex bureaucracy of public assistance, painstakingly researching forms and eligibility criteria online on his phone, never making me feel like a burden, never implying I was incapable. I, of course, had to politely decline, inventing vague reasons about prior arrangements or not wanting to impose, a lie that felt bitter on my tongue, even as I recognized its absolute necessity for my experiment. But the most profound moments were when he would simply sit with me. No conversation was necessary. He would read his own book, or simply gaze out at the park, watching the pigeons peck at crumbs or children chase a ball, sharing a quiet, unspoken moment. I realized he sensed not just mere poverty in me, but a profound loneliness, a soul adrift. He saw a human being in need of connection, not just a body in need of sustenance. He never once asked for anything, never sought recognition, never hinted at expecting a reciprocal gesture, never once implied a future obligation. His empathy was unconditional, his compassion a quiet, steady flame in the encroaching darkness that had enveloped my experimental existence. He spoke of his love for the archives, for the hidden stories within ancient documents, his voice lighting up with a gentle passion. He once shared a simple observation about a particularly challenging historical text he was working on, how it revealed the enduring human spirit even in the direst circumstances. His quiet wisdom, his unassuming dignity, profoundly moved me. This selfless kindness, devoid of any expectation, revealed a genuine human connection I had truly believed was lost, a stark, painful contrast to the calculated cruelty of my own family. Kalen Vance, the overlooked archivist, had become, unknowingly, the cornerstone of my revised legacy. He was the answer, the shining beacon in the bleak landscape of my experiment. But every game has an end, right? And so, the time came for the grand reveal, the moment I had meticulously orchestrated, the climax of my profound, painful experiment. The chosen venue was the reading of my will, an event designed to draw out every last one of the vultures who had circled so eagerly around my perceived demise. Invitations, discreetly dispatched by Mr. Peterson, my ever-loyal legal guardian, had gone out weeks prior, stating simply that the final wishes of Lysander Thorne would be unveiled at a specific time and place. The location was significant, the grand boardroom of the Thorne Foundation, a space I had personally overseen the design of, a room that had witnessed countless strategic decisions and philanthropic endeavors under my leadership. It was a stage I knew well, and I intended to command it one last time, not as a dying man, but as a resurrected one. The day arrived, crisp and clear, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within those elegant walls. I had spent the morning in preparation, not for a funeral, but for a rebirth. My disguise, the threadbare clothes, the unkempt hair, the stooped posture, the weary resignation in my eyes, all shed with a sense of profound liberation. In its place, I donned a custom-tailored suit of the finest charcoal gray, a crisp white shirt, and a rich silk tie, carefully knotted. My hair was meticulously styled, my beard trimmed to a distinguished silver, framing a face that was no longer drawn by hardship but sharpened by experience. The transformation was complete, a return to the man I truly was, but with a wisdom etched into my features that only my recent ordeal could have provided. I looked in the mirror, and for the first time in months, I recognized myself, truly. It was Lysander Thorne, but a Lysander Thorne forever changed. As the appointed hour approached, I arrived not on foot, as the pauper Lysander would have, but in a sleek, black Rolls-Royce, chauffeur-driven, which pulled up silently to the Foundation's imposing entrance, a subtle statement of my returned status. The uniformed doorman, who had previously ignored my presence as a vagrant, now snapped to attention, his eyes widening in confusion. Mr. Peterson, my ever-loyal confidant, was already waiting at the curb, his usually stoic face betraying a hint of anticipation, a rare, almost mischievous twinkle in his eye. Together, we walked into the building, past the familiar reception desk where the receptionist nearly dropped her phone, and towards the boardroom, the air thick with growing whispers and murmurs of my miraculous recovery. The room was already abuzz with hushed whispers and expectant faces. Serafina and Barnaby were there, naturally, positioned prominently near the head of the table, their expressions a grotesque mixture of feigned solemnity and barely contained anticipation. They clutched their expensive briefcases, their smiles thin, their eyes darting to the door. Other distant relatives, a handful of Foundation board members who had shown little interest in my well-being but keen interest in my assets, and various opportunistic associates were also present, each with their own speculative gleam in their eyes. They looked smug, confident in their inherited slice of my empire, already mentally spending their imagined fortunes. The moment I stepped through the double doors, a collective, audible gasp rippled through the room. Conversations died abruptly, cut short mid-sentence. Forks, mid-air, dropped onto plates with a clatter. Eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed in confusion, then widened again in horror as recognition dawned. Serafina's jaw dropped so low I feared it might dislocate, her perfectly applied lipstick doing little to hide the sudden pallor of her face. Barnaby, ever the pragmatist, momentarily lost his composure entirely, his face draining of all color, his carefully composed smirk replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. They recognized me, of course, but not as the derelict they had so casually dismissed. They saw the Lysander Thorn of old, but with an intensity in my gaze they had never witnessed, a steely resolve born of my ordeal. I walked slowly, deliberately, to the head of the long mahogany table, my steps measured, my posture regal, commanding. A silence so profound descended that one could almost hear the frantic thoughts racing through their minds, impossible. He's back. But how? What does this mean? Mr. Peterson took his place beside me, a knowing, almost mischievous twinkle in his eye, clearly enjoying the spectacle. I surveyed the room, letting my gaze linger on Seraphina and Barnaby for a beat longer than necessary, watching their faces contort from shock to dawning terror, the dawning realization of their monumental error. Then, I spoke, my voice clear and resonant, filling the room, utterly devoid of the tremor it had possessed in my disguise, a voice of authority that had once commanded respect. "Good morning, everyone," I began, the words hanging in the air like a pronouncement, each syllable imbued with the weight of my recent experience. "I believe many of you are here today for a specific reason, concerning my will and the future of the Thorn Foundation. And you are not mistaken. But before we proceed with the legal formalities, I have a story to tell. A story about truth, about appearances, and about the true measure of character." I paused, letting the words sink in, allowing the tension to build. "For the past few months," I continued, my eyes scanning the room, my voice gaining a quiet power, "I have been conducting an experiment. A very personal, very revealing experiment. You see, after my recent health scare, as I lay in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, I began to wonder. I wondered about legacy, about true worth, and about the nature of the people I had surrounded myself with, the people I was considering entrusting my life's work to. I then began to narrate my charade, not in angry accusation, but with a calm, almost detached observation, as if discussing a scientific study, presenting my findings. I spoke of the feigned financial collapse, the chosen disguise, the lonely, dilapidated apartment. I described, in vivid, unflinching detail, the cold shoulders, the averted gazes, the hurried excuses, the subtle whispers about my mental decline, the contempt I had witnessed. I didn't name Seraphina or Barnaby directly at first, but my gaze, unwavering, fixed on them, made it abundantly clear whom I was speaking of. I saw the fear in their eyes, the frantic glances they exchanged, the dawning realization of their monumental error, the knowledge that their carefully constructed masks of concern had crumbled, revealing the raw, ugly truth beneath. Their faces were a canvas of guilt and horror. Then, I shifted the narrative, the tone of my voice softening slightly, though no less powerful. "But in the midst of this darkness," I said, my voice now laced with genuine emotion, "I encountered light. A quiet, unassuming light. A young man who, despite having no reason or expectation of reward, extended simple, selfless kindness. He left me food when I was hungry, he offered comfort when I was cold, he simply saw me, not as a former patron, not as a burden, but as a human being in need of connection, a soul adrift. He didn't know who I was, nor did he care. His compassion was pure, untainted by expectation or ambition." I turned my gaze towards Kalen Vance, who was sitting quietly near the back, looking utterly bewildered by my sudden presence and my strange monologue, his face pale with confusion. He had been invited, as a key employee of the foundation, but clearly had no idea what was truly unfolding. "Kalen," I said, my voice filled with a warmth that had been absent moments before, a warmth that resonated through the silent room, "please, come forward." The room collectively turned to stare at the unassuming archivist, who, pale and trembling, slowly made his way to the front, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and bewilderment. The stage was set for the consequences of their actions, and for the revelation of my true, final wishes. The silence that followed Kalen's hesitant steps towards the front of the room was thicker than ever, heavy with a mixture of disbelief, dread, and a burgeoning sense of schadenfreude among those who were not Serafina or Barnaby. I let the moment hang, allowing the weight of the situation to settle. Kalen stood beside me, looking utterly bewildered, his eyes darting between me, the formidable Lysander Thorne, and the stunned, hostile faces of his colleagues. He had no idea what was coming, no inkling of the profound shift his quiet kindness had orchestrated. "Mr. Peterson," I stated, turning to my lawyer, "if you would be so kind as to read the revised will." Mr. Peterson, ever the professional, nodded solemnly, retrieved a thick document from his worn leather briefcase, and began to read, his voice clear and resonant, cutting through the heavy silence. The initial clauses were standard, almost mundane: bequests to various well-known charities, museum endowments, small sums to distant relatives who had, at least, remained polite during my perceived downfall. Serafina and Barnaby shifted impatiently, their eyes still wide with shock, but perhaps now tinged with a flicker of hope that this elaborate charade was merely a preamble to their rightful, multi-million-dollar inheritance. Their greed, even in this moment of uncertainty, was palpable. Then came the clauses that concerned my immediate family, the true heart of my revised intentions. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat, a subtle gesture that signaled a shift in tone. "To my grandniece, Serafina Thorne, and her fiancé, Barnaby Finch, in recognition of their dedicated service to the Thorne Foundation, and in particular, their efforts in public relations and financial advisement, I bequeath a sum of $10,000 each." A collective gasp swept through the room, quickly followed by a stunned, disbelieving silence. $10,000. For people who had openly expected millions, for a couple who had spoken, with barely concealed arrogance, of their future as the torchbearers of the Thorne legacy, it was a pittance. An insult. Serafina's face went from pale to a beetroot red, her eyes bulging with a mixture of fury and disbelief. Barnaby, usually so composed, so calculating, looked as though he had been struck by lightning, his mouth agape, utterly speechless for once in his life. $10,000. Serafina shrieked, her voice cracking with outrage, her carefully cultivated composure completely shattered. "Is this some kind of sick joke, Uncle Lysander? After everything we've done for you, for the foundation? The sacrifices we made?" Her voice rose to a hysterical pitch. I met her furious, indignant gaze, my own calm and unyielding, reflecting the cold, hard truth of her actions. "Indeed, Serafina," I replied, my voice dangerously soft, each word a hammer blow. "It is precisely after everything you've done. Your dedicated service, as you put it, your true motivations, were observed with meticulous detail. Your concern for my well-being, your subtle efforts to manage my decline, and your swift, absolute abandonment of a man you believed to be without means, have been noted. The will merely reflects the true value of your contributions, in my final and very clear assessment." Barnaby finally found his voice, sputtering, his face a mask of outrage. "This is preposterous. You can't just disinherit us based on some bizarre, cruel experiment. This is legally unsound. We'll contest this. We have rights." "On the contrary, Mr. Finch," Mr. Peterson interjected smoothly, without looking up from the document, his voice a calm, authoritative counterpoint to Barnaby's sputtering rage. "Mr. Thorne is of sound mind, as proven by a recent, comprehensive psychological evaluation requested by myself. This will has been meticulously drafted, reviewed, and witnessed by multiple independent legal professionals, reflecting his absolute final wishes. Every provision is legally unimpeachable. Any attempt to contest it would be costly, futile, and would only serve to further publicize your regrettable actions." The air crackled with their fury and humiliation. Their carefully constructed image, their entire future, lay shattered at their feet, reduced to dust. The subtle rumors they had spread, the calculated distance they had maintained, the very instruments of their malice, now became the very instruments of their undoing. Their downfall was swift and absolute. Serafina's position at the foundation, which I had gifted her, became immediately untenable. The board, now fully aware of her duplicity and the true nature of her PR efforts, initiated immediate proceedings for her dismissal, citing breach of trust, gross negligence, and conduct unbecoming of a foundation executive. Barnaby's venture capital firm, sensitive to public image and the whispers of scandal that would inevitably follow him, quickly distanced themselves, his partnership dissolving in short order. Their social standing plummeted faster than a lead balloon, their names now whispered with disdain rather than admiration. Their engagement, I later learned, ended in a bitter, public spat fueled by mutual blame and recrimination, their union dissolving into acrimony. They had lost everything they truly valued, reputation, wealth, and each other. They were left with nothing but the emptiness of their own greed, watching from the sidelines as the world they had aspired to inhabit closed its doors to them forever. Then, Mr. Peterson continued, his voice taking on a different cadence, a note of quiet triumph replacing the earlier legalistic dryness. And now, concerning the future of the Thorn Foundation, and its true philanthropic spirit. I hereby establish a new, perpetual endowment, to be known as the Lysander Thorn Compassion Fund, with a substantial initial funding of $50 million. A fresh wave of gasps erupted, this time of awe, not anger, rippling through the remaining attendees. This fund, Mr. Peterson continued, his voice resonating with significance, will be specifically dedicated to supporting emerging artists from disadvantaged backgrounds, preserving overlooked cultural heritage sites, and establishing community arts programs in underserved areas, causes which embody the true, selfless spirit upon which this foundation was built, a spirit that was, regrettably, forgotten by some. He paused, then looked directly at Kalin, who was still standing beside me, his face a mixture of profound bewilderment and humble awe. And the trustee, the sole manager and guiding hand of this endowment, with full authority and autonomy, shall be Kalin Vance. Kalin, who had been standing wide-eyed and pale, swayed slightly, as if struck by an invisible force. His jaw dropped, and a soft, incredulous gasp escaped him, barely audible in the suddenly silent room. "Me," he whispered, his voice cracking with disbelief. "But, why?" I stepped forward, placing a gentle, reassuring hand on his trembling shoulder, my gaze holding his. "Because, Kalin," I said, my voice filled with a warmth that had been absent moments before, a profound, heartfelt emotion. "You alone saw beyond the surface. You saw a man, not a title. You offered kindness when there was no gain, compassion when there was no expectation. You embody the very spirit I always intended for this foundation, integrity, humility, and a genuine, selfless desire to uplift and preserve, not for prestige, not for personal glory, but for humanity, for the enduring beauty of our shared culture. This endowment is not just a gift of money, Kalin. It is a trust. A profound trust in your character, a deep belief that you will ensure the Thorn Foundation continues its true work, guided by integrity and genuine compassion, not by the fleeting whims of social ambition or personal prestige." Kalin's eyes welled up, not with greed, but with profound disbelief and humble gratitude. He looked at the vast sum on the paper, then at me, then at the stunned, silenced faces in the room. He nodded slowly, tears tracing paths down his cheeks, a silent acceptance of a burden he would carry with dignity and purpose, a legacy he would nurture with an honest heart. The room was utterly silent, witnessing not just a will reading, but a profound reordering of justice, a testament to the quiet power of true goodness. So what happened to them all? The immediate aftermath of that day was a whirlwind of media frenzy, social upheaval, and personal reckoning. Serafina and Barnaby's downfall was as spectacular as it was swift. Stripped of their positions, their carefully cultivated reputations in tatters, they became instant social pariahs, their names whispered with disdain rather than admiration. Barnaby's brilliant venture capital career evaporated overnight, his firm eager to shed any association with the scandal and the public humiliation. Serafina found herself utterly unemployable in the high-stakes world of PR she had so desperately coveted, every door, every connection she had so diligently built, slammed shut in her face. Their engagement, once a cornerstone of their social climbing, crumbled under the crushing weight of recrimination and bitter blame. They were left with nothing but the emptiness of their own greed, watching from the sidelines as the world they had aspired to inhabit closed its doors to them forever. I heard whispers of them trying to start over in a different city, far from the echoes of their shame, attempting to reinvent themselves, but I never sought to confirm it. My observation was complete, their lesson, learned perhaps too late, was a harsh one. Caelan Vance, on the other hand, blossomed. The initial shock gave way to a quiet, resolute determination that shone through his gentle demeanor. He took on the immense responsibility of the Lysander Thorne Compassion Fund with a humility that only deepened my respect for him. He consulted with experts, assembled a small, dedicated team of truly passionate individuals, and meticulously researched projects that truly aligned with the fund's mandate. Under his thoughtful guidance, the Thorne Foundation, through the Compassion Fund, reached new heights of impact. It began funding grassroots arts initiatives in neglected communities, preserving ancient texts that had been overlooked for centuries, and providing scholarships to talented young artists who otherwise would have been denied opportunities simply for lack of means. Caelan never sought the limelight, he worked tirelessly behind the scenes, his focus always on the genuine good the fund could achieve, on the real lives it could touch. He transformed the foundation from a symbol of my personal prestige into a living, breathing testament to selfless giving, a true force for good. My own life, in the years that followed, found a serenity I hadn't known before. I resumed my quiet life, no longer driven by the relentless pursuit of acquisition or public acclaim. I spent my days reading, writing, and occasionally visiting Caelan at the foundation, not as his former employer, but as a mentor, a confidant, and indeed, a cherished friend. Our conversations were no longer about art history or foundation strategy, but about the profound intricacies of human nature, about the quiet power of empathy, and the true meaning of legacy. I found immense peace knowing that my life's work would continue, not as a static monument to my ego, but as a dynamic conduit for genuine kindness, guided by a soul far purer than my own. I had stripped myself bare, not just to test others, but to truly see myself, to understand what truly mattered when everything else was gone. And in that vulnerability, in that profound act of self-effacement, I discovered a profound truth that reshaped my entire understanding of the world. I learned my lesson about human nature. It is not in the grand gestures or the public accolades that true character is forged, but in the quiet, unassuming moments, in how we treat those who can do nothing for us. True wealth lies not in what you accumulate, but in the integrity you preserve, and the genuine connections you forge. The most valuable currency, I discovered, is kindness, freely given, without expectation of return. Our channel is full of stories like this, narratives of human resilience, deception, and unexpected grace. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next adventure into the human heart. Have you ever been surprised by someone's true colors when circumstances changed? Tell me your story in the comments below.